Let's start off in Exodus 14. We know the story fairly well. Let's think about it a little bit today. Exodus 14 and verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite Baal-zephon. And you shall camp before the sea, for Pharaoh will say of the children, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in." Verse 5, and now it was told that the king of Egypt, that when the people had fled, the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people, and they said, "Why have we done this? Why have we let Israel go from serving us?" So he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him, and he took 600 choice chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt, with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of the king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. So the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and the chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and he overtook them by camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. What battles are you facing? We're all facing battles every day. At work, our job satisfaction. We're all kind of overworked. We're too busy. We're not getting enough sleep. We're fighting an illness. Illnesses mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually. We're fighting these battles. There's more and more stress put upon us each day individually. Perhaps our battles are from something in our past. Maybe they're part of our training, our programming from some point in our life, based on our experiences in the past, real or imagined. Maybe they're based on our failures. Maybe our battles are faced on those around us, our family, our friends, our coworkers, and our brethren. Maybe our battles are there because of our prior failures and what we know we've done, and we carry those battles within us. How do we face the problems and the trials that we encounter? What can we do as we're coming up on the Passover, unleavened bread season, this coming next couple months? What can we learn about the events here in Exodus 14, which is the last or the seventh day of unleavened bread? What can we learn from the events of that as we're facing the Passover season? But how can we overcome these Egyptians, these insurmountable obstacles that are placed before us? What was Israel's attitude at this time? Sitting by the sea, Exodus 14 and verse 11. And they said to Moses, "Because there were no graves in Egypt, you have taken us away to die in the wilderness. Why have you so dealt with us? Bring us up out of Egypt. For this is not the word that we told you in Egypt, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to just serve the Egyptians that we can die in the wilderness than we die in here in the wilderness." Israel really wasn't in a much different state than Pharaoh, right? It was us, we, self. They had a fear. They had that spirit of collectivism, that collective salvation, groupthink, progressive thought process, right? It was their pride, their selfishness. But this is not how you solve a problem. This is not how you face a battle. So what did God say? How did God react to this? Well, first he reacted to Pharaoh. Exodus 14 and verse 4. Then I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. So number one, you have to put God first, him alone. God's response to Israel in chapter 14, verse 15 through 18, and the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, but lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the children of Israel should go out on dry ground through the midst of the sea, and I will indeed harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them. And I will gain honor over Pharaoh and over all his army, his chariots, and his horsemen." These battles. "And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, that I have gained honor for myself over Pharaoh." Where is the emphasis? The emphasis is on putting honor and glory to God. First step. In this case, in our life, we should live by agape, doing what is best for another person. In this case, it is doing what is best for God, giving him the glory. So then we go through the story a little bit more here in the next couple of verses. So Moses tells Israel what to do. The next verse, verse 14 and verse 13. "And Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will see again no more forever. This word stand, we say stand still because that's the King James translation of it. The stand is yatsab, Y-A-T-S-A-B. It's Hebrews 33:20. It's stand, present, set, stand still, stand up, withstand. So when you're surrounded, when you're in a battle, stand up, be present, stand fast. And what happens when you stand up? You lift your head up, don't you? And then you see. The world was ending for Israel. All that they had known before their entire life, all that they had done, they had fought for, and their world was just slavery. Now they were trapped by the sea and the mountains and the Egyptians. And they probably, I bet a few of them thought they were trapped by this God who was just this pillar of fire, right? This God that they were so murmuring about. Some were likely wanting to fight, and some probably wanting to swim, and some were just kind of accepting they were going to die. But Moses said, stand, be present, see, change your viewpoint, change your perspective. See something you couldn't see before. Like an eagle kind of perched up on a tree, looking. So they went forth. Exodus in 14, verse 22. So the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall. They were now in the midst. They walked into the sea. So they didn't go just like to the edge of the sea. They had to go out into the middle of this thing. And they were slaves in Egypt. It's a pretty arid climate. There's not a lot of ocean around them. They're probably not water-loving people, right? And the sea to them were these wild things. This was the ocean. This is something that was unknown. This is something they knew nothing about. The sea to them wasn't living waters, as we might think of waters from our perspective. This wasn't the peaceful living waters that we're familiar with us that may nourish us and help us to grow. Their sea, the Red Sea, was wild and uncontrolled, an uncontrollable wilderness. I mean, you can't drink seawater, right? Seawater is death. Israel had to take the faith to stand there and accept God and step out into the middle of what they knew as death, to step into the chaos of an ocean. When you're in a battle, is it chaos out there sometimes? You have to walk out into it sometime and fight that battle. You have to walk out into the midst of the unknown, of the sea. We may only see confusion, chaos, this turbulent sea churning about, but there's something else there, isn't it? Let's go to this last half of verse 22. And the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The word wall here, just a wall, right? The word is chomah, C-H-O-W-M-A-H, a wall of protection. Hebrews 23:46. So God is fighting for them. There's a wall of protection on either side. This mysterious death and fear that they saw, this sea, was actually God fighting for them. This was a wall where God had turned death that they saw from their perspective into protection. The things that we fear, the things that we feel that are surrounding and defeating us, God turned those things into victory. Have you ever had that happen in your life? Has God ever turned the sea of what you feel is your destruction into your salvation? And the other part of this is, the fourth point, is you can't do it yourself because God's protection is there. It's not just this wall, but it's on what? It's on the left side and the right side. How do you do things when you want to do something? You got to use your left hand or your right hand. In this case, they couldn't. Their hands were tied. They could do nothing of themselves. They had to let God work his plans and his actions and walk in his protection. Their salvation wasn't anything they could do. They couldn't use their left side of their brain, that logic, reasoning, rational, trying to figure it all out. They couldn't use the right side of their brain, their emotions, their heart, their passion. No, they had to let God do it on both sides. Their hands were tied. This is clearly not what they were thinking back hours before, days before, weeks before. It's clearly a change in the system and the approach. How often do you try to solve the problem yourself? If I think through this and break it down and use every little possible way I can analyze this and talk about it, I'll figure it out. If I let my heart guide me, I'll know what the right thing to do is. No. You have to stop and let God be your hands. It really is out of your hands. It is not something you can do of yourself. You have to go back to step number 1, right? Put God first, him alone. Let the Lord fight for you. Let his glory be done. You have to stand up, stand tall, and kind of look and see what's coming and see what you fear. And then you got to walk out into it. Now, there's an interesting part of this story, but you ever realize that as they're coming out of those walls and God's bringing down the water behind them, right? They weren't out of it yet. If you read this there, as the waters are covering the Egyptians and the Pharaoh and the horsemen, they're still in the water. We always kind of see the movie version of it, right? And they're all kind of fled, and they're all kind of sitting there watching the water come back down. That ain't what was happening. The water was coming down behind them, and they had to keep walking through it. There's something there as well, right? Sometimes we feel that we're going to get through it, and it's collapsing around us. We feel like we're not going to make it. We don't seem safe yet. We're not to the other side yet. But as far as you can tell, God's taking care of it behind you. We have battles, and we have obstacles. We have circumstances beyond our control, maybe beyond our imagination. Verse 31 ends in chapter 14. Thus Israel saw the work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. This is how Israel finally knew God was real. They finally learned that God was real and present for them there. He wasn't a fiction of some pagan version of how gods are supposed to be viewed. Something that, attacked Egypt on their behalf. They probably didn't have a direct personal presence with him as they were seeing these things going on. They were just like, okay. This is something now personal that they had to see and witness and feel. The battle at the Red Sea was not with Egypt. It's with each of us. It's your faith, it's your courage, it's your fortitude, your personal pursuit of God. It's a battle for your mind. You have to learn to put God first, him alone. When you're surrounded, stand up, see, be present, stand fast. You have to walk into the midst of the unknown. And you can't do it yourself. God's wall is there on your left hand and on your right hand. Let God work his wonders. Let God put himself between you and your enemy. Let God part the waters when all you see is failure. Let God be a wall of protection all around you. Let God be your right hand and your left hand. And stand still and walk into the midst of the sea.